Hello, everyone, and welcome to ATV Wealth Community Spotlight, where we dive into the stories that make our community vibrant and shine a light on the people and organizations making a difference. I'm Rob Cupello. Today I'm joined by Ginny Becker. Ginny, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Ginny's the Executive Director of the Child and Youth Advocacy Center, the CYAC. We might say that so we don't have to pronounce the whole thing maybe down the road. But Ginny, it's funny because yesterday you sent me an email and you said, just to correct you, Rob, it's not Child Advocacy Center, it's Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Could maybe talk about when that shift happened and why that shift happened?
Sure. Yeah, we were operating as the Child Advocacy Center for since our operational start point, which was January 1st, 2020. Okay. And then in this last year, we made the decision to evolve the naming convention of the center over to the Child and Youth Advocacy Center. And we did that for two reasons. The first one was that if you look across the country, there's almost 50 operating child and youth advocacy centers in the country now. And really, we wanted to align our convention to the rest of the country, partly because it helps to eliminate confusion and make sure everybody understands what these centers do. Right. The other reason, though, was that we do serve children and youth up to 19. And most youth don't prefer to be referred to as a child. Yeah, so from a trauma-informed lens, we really wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that to make sure our space feels safe and comfortable for those youth that we're serving as well.
Interesting. So I think most people in the community probably have heard of the Child and Youth Advocacy Center, but maybe for the ones that haven't, can you explain a little bit of sort of what the services you provide to children and family, and sort of what your guys' mission is?
Sure, but I do have to say first that I love that you just said most people in the community have probably heard of it. I still think of us as somewhat of a new organization in town.
But you guys do an amazing job getting the word out.
Yeah, it was. The first couple of years though, I would walk into a room and how many people have heard of us, and not crickets. A single person in the room. But now I can say our community has really embraced what we do, and when I walk into spaces now to talk about what we're doing, or I go to sell calendars at Fun Foods or something. Now more than 50 to 60% of the people coming up to talk to us have heard of us or been impacted by us, which is really heartwarming to know that the work that we're doing is starting to have that ripple effect into community. But essentially what we are is we are a dedicated wraparound service for children who've had an experience of child abuse or neglect. So we're a purpose-built facility, and within that facility we have dedicated child forensic police officers. We have a complete medical clinic with a pediatrician and a nurse. We have mental health supports. We have, in partnership with Central Okanagan, with BRI, we have victim supports. We have an on-site remote testimony location for children. And essentially the best way to understand what all of that means is that historically, when a child would disclose abuse, it would create a real sort of fractured, disjointed, I always call it a ping pong ball effect of services that you really have to self-navigate. Right. What centers like ours do is put all of those services into one really culturally safe, trauma-informed environment to make sure that children are really held at the center and that we're helping navigate that system around them. So it's really about reducing system harm and making sure that what children need is really identified, and so that we can wrap all those supports around them.
And so do you just work with, as the name says, the child and youth? What about if there's like parents involved, is there coaching around with parents?
That's such a great question. I actually think it might be the first time anyone ever asked me that question in an interview. And it's such an important distinction of what we do. Historically, in traditional response models, most of the services that do happen to be available are directed at the primary victim of that abuse. Right. But whenever there's abuse in a home around a child or abuse around a child, there's always a ripple effect to that abuse, whether it's to siblings, caregivers, safe caregivers. Right. So a good portion of what we do is about wrapping holistic services around that safe family unit. So the people that are caring for and protecting them. Right. So we do a lot of counseling and support services with other children in the family and also with those safe caregivers.
Yeah, I never think about siblings as well. Yeah, interesting.
Some of the most significant trauma is with siblings who are aware of or witnessed or heard or saw, but we're also holding these stories. Right. Holding these stories can be really traumatic. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
And then how far reaching, what areas do you cover in the center? Like how far geography wise.
So the way a file comes to us is initially it's around the coordination of the investigation of that abuse. So we work in partnership with the Ministry of Child and Family Development and the RCMP. So from that perspective, we serve the jurisdiction that includes the detachments of Peachland, Kelowna, West Kelowna, and Lake Country. Medically, because our clinic is supported through the Health Authority, we're open to serving any child who's had this experience of abuse from the region. We work in partnership with a specialized clinic in Kamloops. So there's options for families depending on what works for them to attend our clinic.
Interesting. So you mentioned sort of how you walk in a room now that more than 50% of people have actually heard of you are. So one of the recognitions you recently got is to the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce. You recognize excellence in not-for-profit. So kudos, congratulations on that. Can you share sort of what a recognition like that means to the center and your team, right? Because it's a recognition of the work you guys have done. Right? So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm always very reluctant to participate in things that seem like competition between not-for-profits.
Fair enough.
I am such a huge believer that our community really needs all of the work that we do as colleagues across the not-for-profit sectors to support the most vulnerable citizens. So I'm always a little bit reluctant about that idea that we compete, because certainly in a center like ours, we rely on so many other not-for-profits to help support other needs that these families have. Like if we have a family who is fleeing domestic violence at the same time as child abuse, we're also partnering with organizations like the Women's Shelter. There could be food insecurity, so the food bank is brought into it. So for me, that it's always a little bit of a moral dilemma of do we do this? That being said, for me, the Chamber Awards do such a great job of acknowledging all of the nominees, and really just the fact that the not-for-profit sector is included is a good reminder to community to think of the sector like a business and how we contribute to things like employment and all of that. So for me, that recognition really came down to, honoring the nomination, but also shining a light on the not-for-profit sector by being included, which I think is really important. So for our team, it's a beautiful recognition to know that, 5 years in and how hard we've all worked to make this center possible, and also the community that supporting it. It's a really nice way for the whole community to kind of see that. And there were some other amazing organizations, and so it's a beautiful thing. I always go into it with a little bit.
Fair enough.
It's so hard to compete with people who nobody's work is less valuable than the others in this sector. So for sure. To me that's just always we have to think about that when we do these things. But it's a beautiful recognition. I think the chamber handles it very well and does a great job of kind of celebrating everybody that's in it.
I think even just being nominated within those circles is a win in my mind, because it's just recognition. Like you said, maybe you didn't get the award, quote unquote, but it's still recognized for the work that you do. Right?
Absolutely. And for the team.
For sure.
For your team that's on the front line, it's such heavy work that we do. The content that they carry is unimagimal to most. So a little recognition certainly is nice.
Yeah, fair enough. We talked about before we went on air, like this time of the year, holiday season, for many reasons, is particularly challenging for vulnerable families. So, do you guys see an increase of, I want to say, cases, if that's the right word, and how does the center sort of work within those challenges this time of the year?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first couple of years it was during COVID, so it's always a little hard to pull that out of the equation. But we would see certain periods where it would slow down a little bit. And I will say that now we almost never slow down anymore. We're busy every single day. But certainly around the holidays, we do know that the complications of the holidays, the stressors of the holidays, the financial impact of the holidays can have significant impact on vulnerable families. These things can lead to violence in the home. And so we typically tend to see, actually right following the holidays, a bit of a surge in reporting around child abuse. So it tends to be a very busy time of year. Right. When you look at how this center has grown and expanded, on the first day of operations, almost 5 years ago now, there was 2 of us. Today, there's more than 30 of us collaborating. And it's everyday work. The center's busy every single day. So it really comes down to capacity and continuing to strengthen the partnerships within community to make sure we can continue to serve the way that we do, because it only gets busier month by month, basically.
Interesting. So you mentioned calendars. So you're one of your big fundraisers, the Season of Giving calendar. Can you talk a little bit about that is and how it supports your initiatives?
Yeah, that calendar, it's such a fun fundraiser. Essentially, that calendar, the concept for it came up during COVID when Sunrise Rotary had to sort of pivot their fundraising strategy away from events to something different. And so at the time, they had a Rotarian who had been a Rotary exchange student several years prior and had seen this fundraiser in Germany where they had done an exchange. So brought it to the table and everybody rallied behind it. And so I think this is our 5th calendar year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's really become something that for us has the beautiful dual impact of raising really important funds for us, but also raising a lot of awareness. So we have Rotarians and volunteers across the community out selling calendars at the farmers, like at the craft markets and things like that, and at Save on Foods. And there really is an almost equal value to the awareness as to the funding.
The funding, fair enough.
For moments like this. So we're super grateful to the community for embracing that calendar the way they have. It's a really fun way to celebrate the holidays and give back. Plus, you get to extend Christmas a little bit because it's actually an Advent calendar for after Christmas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you start opening the doors on the 25th of December.
And then there's a code in there?
Yeah, so basically it's a lottery ticket. It's essentially a raffle, right? Okay. So every day you open the door and there's prizes listed. If your number got drawn, then they'll phone you and let you know that you won one of those prizes that day. So yeah, it's a very fun way to kind of extend the holiday season a little bit.
Very cool. So do the funds that are raised specifically around Season of Giving calendar go to a specific initiative or program or not
Yeah, it depends on the year. You know, one of the beautiful things about that style of fundraising is it's what we call unrestricted fundraising, essentially, where it's really about spend it where we need to the most. And that's a really important reality for not-for-profits is to have some of these funds where you can really allocate it where you need to in the moment. For us right now, the most growing area of need is around our mental health systems and support. That team, we've had to evolve that team a little bit. So this year, that funding will be supporting the collaborative counseling services that we work in partnership to deliver and make sure that we can get every kiddo what they need when they come through.
Interesting. If I'm assuming there's calendars available still.
We're getting towards the end.
Okay. So how come
it will sell out? We already know it's going to sell out. These last few days of availability, the only place now to get them is at the Save on Foods in the Valley. So between West Kelowna and Lake Country, Save on Foods happens.
So you're not online. You have to go to Save on.
We didn't do it online this year. It didn't really work last year. It kind of removed the fun of the calendar. Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah.
So the feedback we got was really that the calendar was about holding the calendar in your hand.
Okay.
And it's also fun because every year the artwork on the calendar is a local artist.
Very cool.
And so I think people enjoy supporting that too, which is great. But yeah, so probably within the next few days, I would think they're going to amalgamate them to a single Save on Foods location because there's not a lot left.
So right now, Save on Foods is the only place you can get
Correct.
Them. Awesome. Okay. Get out there and get it today because they're going to sell out.
And I keep telling everybody, you might win a prize, but no matter what, in purchasing a calendar, you've made a difference for vulnerable kids. So
for sure,
it's a win either way.
Well, I love how your outlook on it as well as it just raises awareness as well, and I think that's an important part of it as well because part of what you do is to just get the word out and awareness out there that there is support out there if needed, right?
Well, and it's always been a complex story for us because we don't do big marketing campaigns and big storytelling because our work is around such vulnerable citizens that we have to be very cautious about how we go into communities. So we've always really been one story at a time, conversations like this one where we can really make sure that we the right language is to put into community about what we do so we don't confuse the reporting structure and how things are meant to be reported. So yeah, that's why we're always grateful because this allows us to be in community talking about it, but also holding what we do very carefully in terms of the language that we use.
So on that, I know we can't share specifics, but can you highlight like the impact you've made with families or children in the community? And obviously we can't be specific, but is there anything that really stands out to you over the last 5 years?
Yeah, there's a million stories of impact. I think, some of the stories for me that sit the most is when we have a child that comes into our holistic care model and their caregiver had an experience of abuse of their own in childhood because they are always so profoundly articulate in seeing the difference.
Right.
Because I think that's really, people won't necessarily always understand what would it look like if we weren't here. But we know that it's dramatically different without a center like this. So when we hear from those caregivers, they're sort of awe over, I wish this had existed when I was a child. I wish something like this had been available to me. That for me always sits, with great weight. But, there's things especially like remote testimony right now is something that we launched almost 2 years ago now, which, gives children and youth the opportunity. Having to testify on these matters is a very, very traumatic thing. Oftentimes children are providing testimony about somebody that they love and that should have protected and cared for them. And that's a really tough thing to do. But to also go into a courthouse setting is a really intimidating, complicated scenario. And then to have to sit across from that person physically can be really challenging, or even just to run into them in the hallway or the parking lot or something can be really damaging to that child's ability to tell their truth on that day. So now that children can testify right from our center in a space they already feel safe and secure, that's been really transformational. We've certainly had a number of scenarios where the victim service worker attached or the police officer attached has said if it had been, in a different setting, they never would have come back for a second day. And that can be the difference of a file going forward or not. So I think things like that, a lot of people don't understand what that criminal justice system looks like for kids, because why would you if you haven't had to participate in it? But when you start to witness the difference we can make by being really trauma-informed and really victim-centric and survivor-centric, the criminal justice system is the way it is, for a number of reasons, but it really is built around the criminal side of justice. Those buildings are big and intimidating on purpose. Uniforms are intimidating on purpose. But really putting survivors at the center is such an important difference that we can make in terms of helping people heal and move forward from their experience.
Interesting. You mentioned that there are other centers across Canada. How do you work with those other centers? Do you guys have best practices like you mentioned?
Sure do.
Yeah. And is that where the idea, like you said, you launched here 5 years ago, was that idea born from what you saw other communities doing?
Yeah, so I every time I give a tour at the center, I always literally start with, so this was not our idea. This is the evolving best practice around the globe. I was actually at an international conference on child and youth advocacy centers earlier this year, and there was more than 70 countries represented with this model in place. In Canada, essentially, this model got its start in Huntsville, Alabama, like I think 30-ish years ago now, where the model was designed initially purely to remove the interview piece out of police stations, essentially, into more child-centric environments. And then the model's really going around there. And there are 10 guiding principles that we all kind of work to and adhere and try to uphold. So in Canada, there's a national network of child and youth advocacy centers. And I was just actually on the national yesterday. So we meet quarterly to share best practice and ideas. There's actually now an emerging national research center. And then provincially, actually ours is the first province that's formed to a society of child and youth advocacy centers. So we operate as a charitable entity of our own to support the collective work and best practice. And I'm the vice president currently for that society. And we work very closely together to make sure that communities that want to grow this model have support and have guidance. Because even when we started this center, so much of it we were just figuring it out for ourselves, and we had some, people that we could look to for guidance, but there was still a lot of it that everyone was trying to figure it out at the same time. But now there's a lot of really well understood best practice, and we're very collaborative across the province and across the country, and even internationally, there's a lot of great sharing.
Interesting. Is there any misconceptions that you'd love to kind of like talk about that, when it comes to the work that you guys do? Is there anything sort of like that comes to mind where you're like, it's as a society or a family or whatever might think a different way than it actually is?
That's a really interesting question. I think for me that what comes to mind is, I give a lot of tours at the center. I give tour, for lots of reasons, donors and community members and partners and things like that. But what is always so interesting to me is, when you come on a tour, I always tell people, if you really want to understand what we do, come on a tour, because it's really hard to understand how sort of flawed and broken the traditional system is until you've seen what it can look like. So to me, I think the misconception that most people, as we were just saying a few minutes ago, if you have no reason to know this system, then it's easy to make assumptions that, well, isn't that the way it is?
Yeah.
So we have, donor partners and people come through all the time that at the end of the tour go like, wow, I had no idea. I guess I just assumed this is how it's done, which is, really easy to think about. But the reality is geographical and informational silos between these big agencies that are tasked with responding to things like abuse have traditionally worked in these really sort of separated silos. And there is no question that we do better together, that when we can put people in the space and hold children at the center, we are just better. And so to me, I think that's the biggest thing, is just helping people to kind of see how that system actually is flawed in the traditional sense, and how much better it can be. And, we're living in a community that has had this center now for almost 5 years and has had so much community support. It's really profound to me how much people have really embraced the center and have started to understand why it's important to kids.
Interesting. Looking ahead, what are some of your goals coming into 2025? And the second part of that is, how can community support it?
Yeah, I think for us, we've definitely reached a state where we know who we are and what we do every day. And I'm a huge believer in not duplicating services and things like that, but to work amongst partnerships and amongst other agencies to make sure that together we can collectively hold families up. So for me, that's an ongoing goal, is to continue to strengthen community partnerships and how we work together. We will always be fundraising driven. One of the things that allows us to fill the gaps between the big systems and agencies is that we're not one of them. And I think that's so important for people to know is, while we are always advocating for enhanced government funding, we don't ever want to be fully funded that way. The community's participation in it is what allows us to be agile and responsive. So fundraising for us will always be a reality, but it's also how we're changing the system is by not being part of it. So for me, that's always something I try to help our donors and supporters really hold close to their heart, is they are the reason that we get to build programs and systems that work, as opposed to those that we are told to build. So it's a really important distinction.
Interesting. Any other fundraisers coming up in a new year we should be aware of, or any other thing that we should be aware of coming into 2025?
This is the biggest fundraising time of the year for our whole community of nonprofits, and it's such an important time. And I think it's a good time because people have giving on their mind, and there's personal reasons for that, of where do they give. There's also the tax reasons of trying to get those gifts out the door within the tax year and things like that. So I guess my message to community is, whatever it is that sits in your heart and where that support, where you want to give it. I know that there's every not-for-profit in this community appreciates the giving spirit at this time of year. For us, we always fundraise this time of year. Our campaign is called Who's on Your List? And it's really just us asking people to think about, we have our list of people that we want to take care of, and, asking people if they have room on their list for a child whose name they won't ever know. And we have a match donor in place this holiday season. So, and it's challenging because postal strike. So, people can make donations online. I think most charities have that opportunity in person, things like that. The postal strike can be really damaging to a really important time of year for the not-for-profit sector. So just reminding people there's lots of ways to give. Buy a calendar, visit a charity that you love, like whatever that looks like for you, but there's lots of ways to still give back.
Awesome. Well, Ginny, thank you so much for coming in on short notice.
Thank you.
And I know you guys do a real vital work for the community, so thank you so much for everything you guys do there.
Well, and thank you guys for always giving voice to it. You guys have always been really good at inviting us in, helping us kind of share stories and things like that, which I think is really important because, again, that's how the community learns 100%. About all this work going on in the community. So thank you.
If anyone has any questions, I just recommend you guys can go to the website. It's CYACKelowna.com. Again, it's CYACKelowna.com. I always say every little bit helps. So any contribution you can make can help. So it doesn't have to be big. Or go to Save On and buy your calendars. Hopefully there's a few available in the next couple of days and before they sell out. So, and thank you to ATB Wealth for sponsoring, because we can't do this without them. So thank you for that as well. And thank you, Jenny, again for coming in. Everyone have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.